So there's an old Taoist tale that tells the story of an old man who used to spend most of his days tending after his horses in his village. Then one day he wakes up and disaster has struck. One of his horses has managed to break through the stable doors and escape. So some of the villagers come up to him and say, "Wow, isn't that such bad luck? You've lost your horse." And the old man looks at them and says, "Maybe." Then the very next day, the horse that had bolted comes back and miraculously it's brought with it 3 extra horses. So once again the neighbours come up to the old man and say, "Wow, isn't that such great luck?" And again he looks at them and says, "Maybe." Then the very next day his son was breaking one of the new horses in and it threw him off and he broke his leg. And then once again the neighbours came over who clearly had boundary issues and said, "Wow, isn't that such bad luck?" And once again the old man looked at them and said, "Maybe." Then the next day war broke out and the military came through the village looking for young able-bodied men to enlist them for the army. But because the old man's son had a broken leg, he couldn't enlist. And once again those boundary challenged neighbours came up to him and said, "Wow, isn't that such good luck?" And the old man, I'm sure you've guessed it, said, "Maybe." So there are lots of meanings that we can draw from this story, but one of them is the idea that luck is subjective. It's a psychological construct. That we often think that it's something that happens to us rather than something that we can influence. But in actual fact, by adopting a certain outlook, we can change our perception towards luck and maybe even become luckier as a person, inviting more and richer opportunities in our life. So in this episode, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be exploring the unbelievably cool topic of how to make your life easier by becoming more lucky. Hey there and welcome to the Stress Less Living podcast. My name is Stephen Burns and I've been a practicing coach, trainer and hypnotherapist for 25 years. Each week I'll share easily digestible bite-sized ideas that you can immediately put into practice so that you can live a more harmonious and balanced life. Because life is challenging, but whatever we encounter, we always have a choice. We can take the easy route or the hard route, the low stress way or the high stress way. Well, the Stress Less Living podcast is about always looking for the easy routes in life, the low stress ways to accomplish your goals, get more of what you want, and ultimately live a happy and more effortless life. So if you're looking for the perfect antidote for the chaos of modern life, my friends, you are absolutely in the right place. So in this episode, I'm going to be drawing from the excellent book, The Luck Factor by Richard Wiseman. So the premise of the book is that luck is not something that just happens. It is a psychological construct that we can influence. And he goes through a whole range of ideas and techniques that you can use to become luckier in life. So I'm not going to go through everything in Richard's book. I think that would be a bit disrespectful. But I do want to cover my top 4 takeaways. I'd also strongly recommend you check out the book. So I'll include a link to it in the show notes. It's not an affiliate link or anything. I just like to share good stuff. So let's get started. So the first big takeaway for me is that you become luckier when you're open to new experiences. So I think this is a humongous one, not just for becoming luckier, but it's also great advice. You know, a good friend of mine many years ago gave me some amazing advice. He said that you want to try to do as many different things with as many different people in as many different places as you possibly can. And for some people, that might be quite dramatic. Maybe you decide to travel around the world or quit your job and do something totally different. But for most, it's going to be something more subtle, isn't it? Maybe you just take up a few new hobbies or mix up your peer group every now and again or visit different places and cultures when you go on holiday. And the reason why this is such great advice is because by doing different things, it will expand your mind. It will open up so many new possibilities in how you approach life. As human beings, we feel comfortable with the familiar, but we learn from what's different. So if we just stick with what we know all the time, then we can end up in a bit of a rut. So having new and different experiences is what makes life fresh and exciting. One of the best choices I think I ever made was to learn to dance. So I do a couple of different styles of Latin dancing. And at the time, so we're going back about 12 or 13 years ago when I first started, this was not the kind of thing that a bloke from Scotland does. It still isn't, to be honest. There's this weird belief in Scotland that if you're a man and you dance, then it's feminine. When the reality is the opposite. In fact, if you go to like Latin America and you're a man who can't dance, then they often believe the opposite. They start to question your masculinity. So for me, doing something that was very different to what my culture was saying that I should do was a massive eye-opener. I met so many amazing and interesting people from a wide variety of different nationalities and cultures, and it expanded my mind in so many different ways. And that's just one change in hobby. So by being open to new experiences, it is amazing advice, but according to Richard Wiseman, it also makes you luckier. That when we do different things, when we mix things up a little bit, we increase the likelihood of encountering new opportunities. If we stick to what we know, the brain starts to just take things for granted. We do things automatically and we stop looking for new opportunities because we think there's no new information to process, so we kind of just shut down, go through the motions like we've just seen it all before. But when we do new things, it wakes our brain up because we're processing new information. It becomes more alive. So we're much more sensitive to our surroundings and the opportunities that are there. Also, by doing different things, you're going to meet a lot of new people as well who could be gateways to new ventures. So just by sheer numbers alone, you're going to have a lot more opportunities. I remember when I was 21 years old, I decided to book on a thing called an NLP practitioner training course. So NLP, if you're not aware, stands for Neuro Linguistic Programming. So the course, it was taking place in London, and at that age I had never travelled on my own before, so I was super nervous. And I was also quite socially anxious at the time too, so this was a real big deal for me. I had to force myself to do it. And I still remember the first morning, just before I walked into the training room, I was so nervous that I nearly turned back. But I was like, no, you've paid a lot of money for this course, and you've paid for the flight, you've come down, you've paid for the hotel and all of that jazz. You've got to do it. So I had to really talk myself into it and give myself a bit of a kick up the arse just to get into the training room on that first day. But then after a couple of days, I started to relax a bit, and I met this guy called Alex. So he was a fellow Scot, but he lived in England, a place called Kent. And we hit it off, we became friends and decided to exchange phone numbers at the end of the course. Then about 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from him and he says, Steve, I'm doing this workshop for the local gymnastics team at the weekend. I would love it if you could come down and co-train it with me. Now at the time, I still had a bit of a phobia of public speaking. There was a lot going on with me at that stage. So I was like, no way, I can't do that. You're not getting me in front of an audience. So I initially refused, but he didn't take no for an answer. He was like, no, you can do this. I saw you in that training room. You've got the potential. You're coming down, whether you like it or not. That's kind of like the Scottish version of coaching there. He pretty much just bullied me into it and told me I was doing it and I had to like it or lump it. Now, I have to say, when we delivered the workshop, so I eventually agreed to do it and I went down to Kent and we both delivered this one-day workshop. And I was utterly terrified. I remember we actually filmed it so we could watch our performance afterwards, which was a big mistake, but anyway. And I just looked so scared and so terrified, but I got through it. And afterwards, I felt this tremendous buzz. It might have been just because I was so scared before it, but it just felt right to me. It was absolutely incredible. And I thought, you know what? I'm onto something here. This is worth persevering with. Now, fast forward 25 years, and I've now been running an NLP training school for 13 years now. I've certified probably close to 1,000 people in face-to-face trainings, and I have over 50,000 students online worldwide. And I'm not saying this to boast or to show off or anything like that. It's really just to illustrate the point that I don't think I would be in this position right now if he hadn't convinced me to give teaching a go. And I wouldn't have even had that opportunity if I hadn't decided to do something new back then and go on that training course. So I cannot emphasize this enough. Irrespective of what age you are or where you are in life, the more new experiences that you can fit in, the more opportunities you will naturally have, and you will become luckier as a result. So that's the first key takeaway that I got from the book. And number 2 is learn to trust your intuition. So I think everyone will have had an experience where you meet someone and something just doesn't feel right. It's like they're saying one thing, but you feel like their intentions are very different and they're most likely insincere. I think everyone's had an experience like that. And you can't quite place what it is logically that's just a wee bit out of sync, but you just feel it. And maybe you disregard those feelings and move on regardless. Now, if you've ever done that before, which I think, again, most people have at some stage, has it ever worked out well for you? Well, I would be willing to wager that most of the time it doesn't, because we haven't listened to our intuition. Our guts, our feelings-based hunches, our intuition has a wisdom that goes way beyond logic and reason, but often we don't listen to it. I'm sure, by the way, you've also had the opposite experience too, where you meet someone and you just get a really good feeling in the pit of your stomach, something just clicks, and you know that you want to keep in touch with this person and have them in your life in some capacity. And almost always in this circumstance, it turns out to be a good thing, doesn't it? It certainly has in my life, because our intuition is incredibly powerful. It's the vehicle that we use to tap into the vast wellspring of experience that we have. To go a little woo-woo here, it's one of the main ways that you can talk to your subconscious mind. So there's a great book called Blink by one of my favourite authors, Malcolm Gladwell. So I'll include a link to this book in the show notes as well. So in the book, he explores the difference between making decisions using your head, using logic and reason and information, versus our intuition. That some people like to analyse their decisions. They spend a ton of time weighing up all of the pros and cons, they do research, and they make decisions based on the information they discover. But other people do it in a very different way. They think about it, pass it through their intuition, and make the decision almost in an instant. They do it in the blink of an eye, hence the book title. And more often than not, going by intuition ends up being a lot more accurate, especially with the more complex decisions in our life. So in the book, he tells the story of an ancient Greek statue that was purchased by the John Paul Getty Museum in California in 1983. So the statue itself came with extensive evidence and documentation that suggested it was in fact authentic. But the museum, of course, wanted to do their due diligence, so they did a whole range of scientific checks and tests that lasted about 14 months. And the conclusion from the research was that it was indeed authentic, so they paid close to $10 million for it. Then, one day, the former director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Thomas Hoving, came into the museum and took one look at it and said, "I hope you didn't pay too much for that, because it's clearly a fake." And they said, "How do you know that?" And he said, "I don't know. It's just a feeling. It just looks kind of off." So they decided to take another look at it. They checked out the documentation. They brought other experts in. And lo and behold, it turned out that he was correct. It was a fake. And I think this is such a great story, and it just shows how powerful our gut instincts can be. So in the book, Malcolm Gladwell calls this ability thin slicing, where rather than overanalyzing something, you just take a look, notice the feeling you get with it inside your gut, and then you go with that feeling. And the main point he makes is that you do still want to use information and research to make decisions, but if your gut is telling you something strong, then you'd be foolish not to listen to it. So to get back to luck, we've digressed a little bit there, talking about statues and all sorts of stuff. But this is also the point that Wiseman makes in his book, The Luck Factor, that when you listen more to your feelings and hunches, this will often guide you to making better decisions. You'll be able to make the most of the opportunities that life offers you. That instead of overthinking or overanalyzing, you tune into whether or not something feels like a good fit for you. And if you feel it is, then go for it. You'll find that your luck will increase as a result, and you'll grab all kinds of great opportunities that you would have probably missed if you started to overthink it. So, you're a busy person, you have a demanding job or a hectic lifestyle, and you've heard that meditation is a great way to reduce stress and create calm within the chaos that is your life. But you've tried meditation a few times, maybe with an app or from a book or a YouTube video, and it's just not really worked for you, and you've maybe jumped to the conclusion that meditation isn't for you. Well, if that's the case, I just want to say that it's most likely not your fault. A lot of the time when meditation doesn't really work that well, it's because you're missing a couple of key steps. And if you want to learn what those key steps are and some of the fundamentals of meditation, then I have a free video training that you can enrol on. If you want to check that out, I've included a link to it in the show notes and all the information that you need. So that is key takeaway number 2, learn to trust your intuition. And key takeaway number 3 is practice meditation. Now, I'm not going to be spending too much time on this one because I recently uploaded a fairly chunky episode on meditation. So if you want to check that out, it's episode number 13. But I do want to talk briefly about how meditation fits in with becoming luckier. So you become luckier when you meditate because it helps you tap into your intuition, the one that we just spoke about a moment ago, your feelings and your hunches. A lot of people, when they meditate, they use it to check out, to disconnect. So they've had a hard day at their work, so they get home, they scramble for their phone and their headphones, they launch their meditation app, and they use it to zonk out, to drift off to a galaxy far, far away. And that's cool, that's fine. We all need a release from time to time, but that's not really using meditation to its full effectiveness. In fact, I would suggest that it's not really meditation at all, it's something else. That real meditation is where you're using it to reconnect with yourself. With all the distractions and daily stresses that we experience, we frequently lose our centre, we get knocked off balance. So with meditation, you want to be using it to restore the connection with yourself so that you can recenter and recalibrate. And when we do that, we start to become so much more aware of the feelings and sensations in our body. Meditation fits nicely with mindfulness. And ultimately, what we're doing here is we're improving the connection we have with our inner feelings, our hunches, our intuition. And I think this is like a muscle. If we don't use our muscles, they become weaker over time. But when we flex them regularly, they get stronger and much easier to use. So meditation helps you train the muscles that support your intuition. So meditate more. So that's number 3, and the fourth and final big takeaway is you want to have positive expectations. So a positive expectation, just to explain, is where we imagine good things happening to us in the future and then we get excited about those things. And when we do this, according to Richard Wiseman, it creates a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy and more good things tend to happen to us. And I totally subscribe to this. Expectation is a powerful force. When we expect something, we tend to sort and filter for information that supports that expectation. We bend our reality to include it in some capacity. And you see this in a negative way as well, don't you? That some people like to catastrophize quite a lot. Maybe you've been there in the past, but this is where we see the absolute worst in every situation and continually imagine bad scenarios happening to us, and we repeat those on a loop over and over again. And often what can happen is we get more of these bad things because we tend to get more of what we focus on in life, so the whole thing becomes a negative self-fulfilling prophecy. So I used to work with a guy when I worked in the oil and gas industry a number of years ago, and bless him, he's a really nice guy, love him to bits, but he was so negative. I mean, he could just rip the positivity out of any situation. To him, every silver lining has a cloud. And he used to constantly predict disaster. He loved to catastrophize. He would just imagine things not working out and, he was to blame in all kinds of other negative scenarios. And the thing is, it often became a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. He was one of the most unlucky people I've ever met. Or did he just make his own luck because he was continually catastrophizing? Well, I think it's more likely to be the latter. I've seen that play out far too many times. So to be luckier, you want to do the opposite from my old work colleague. You want to have positive expectations. And in terms of a practical, Wiseman recommends that you do something called dream wishing. So dream wishing is where you think about something that you want and you then imagine it inside your mind's eye, any way that you can do that, and you step into it and you imagine what it would be like if you were to accomplish that. And really imagine it. Don't just give it lip service. Don't make this a cognitive exercise. Imagine it until you feel it. And then you want to just revisit this every now and again. You don't want to just do it once. You want it to repeat it a few times a week. Or you can just even casually imagine it when you're driving your car on a routine destination, or if you're waiting in a queue or something like that. And what you're doing when you dream wish like this is you're training your brain to have positive expectations. And this creates a kind of positive self-fulfilling prophecy that brings more of these expectations into your life. all of a sudden, opportunities start to present themselves that you didn't see before, and assuming that you're listening to your gut, you can take them and really run with them. So that is my 4 key takeaways of the book, The Luck Factor, and some tips on how to become luckier in life. I totally recommend that you check out the book. It is excellent. I love the way he completely redefines luck as something that you have influence over. It's actually even not about luck per se. It's about being able to do things that create more high quality opportunities for ourselves and being able to seize those opportunities when they come our way. And I think a lot of success and happiness in life comes down to that. So I want to finish off this episode by sharing a quote. I do love a quote. Who doesn't love a quote? So this is from American actress and comedienne Lucille Ball. So if you're old enough to remember, she was in a famous TV programme called I Love Lucy. So she said, "Luck? I don't know anything about luck. I've never banked on it, and I'm afraid of people who do. Luck to me is something else. It's hard work and realising what is an opportunity and what isn't." And I really like that. I think most people think that luck is some kind of weird external entity that just happens to us. But what if it wasn't like that at all? What if there were certain mindset and behavioural shifts that you could do to increase your opportunities and enhance your ability to grab those with both hands when they come your way and really make the most out of them? So thank you so much for listening. I'm off to buy a lottery ticket because I feel particularly lucky today. No, just cancel that last statement. Please do not resort to gambling as a result of this episode. But thank you so much for listening. If you got value from it, then I would appreciate it greatly if you could follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you feel like you got especially good value from this episode, then if you could drop me a review, again, I would absolutely love that. You would be my best friend, even though I most likely have never met you before. Anyway, it's time to go. I'm just waffling. So thank you once again for listening, and I'll speak to you in the next episode.